Hello, people. How are we? Dear Diary, we're back. Episode 43. I've got my trusty ginger and lemon. I think it's ginger and lemon. I thought it was a honey and lemon, but turns out it's a ginger and lemon. And I've actually been making these homemade ginger, turmeric, lemon, apple, and carrot shots. I ordered like these little 100 ml glass screw top bottles you can get off Amazon. Because I found that if you buy from the shop, they're like £4 and you get a 60 ml bottle. And I was like, I could make 10 for £4 or near enough £4. So I've bought the stuff. I got myself a NutriBullet about 2 weeks ago and I've started making them and they are powerful. I've actually forgot to have mine this morning. I've had them every morning, so I'm going to go and drink it after. And they're like these powerful little vials. It's almost like a super strength potion. Like you drink it and all of a sudden like you get +5 or something. But they are so powerful. And no word of a lie, I don't know whether this is just because I've been having them for the first time, or it's just placebo and it's the way that I think it happens when I have these things. Like I genuinely feel like I've taken drugs when I've had one of those shots. I don't know what it is. I just feel like amped up, ready to go. I just feel my body and the cells just being like, thank you so much. So get on to doing some health shots. And I need to refine the recipe for that though, because they taste just like friggin' earth. They taste pretty bad. I put way too much turmeric in there. Like I put a whole packet of like turmeric root, not even like ground turmeric, just the root that I bought from where I get my food shop from. And holy shit, it tasted like earth. And they've been pretty difficult to get down. So I need to maybe put more lemon and more apple so it's sweeter, less turmeric, maybe the same ginger because I want the same kick, but I just need some sweetness in there. So maybe a few, not dates. And that's another thing I've been making, like these dates with peanut butter and covered in dark chocolate. Now, if you want healthy snacks that taste unhealthy, like if you want a treat that isn't a treat or something that feels like you're just cheating, make those. Or even better, well, this is a different one, apricots covered in dark chocolate, sprinkled with sea salt. Oh God, the texture on those bad boys is insane. They're like little crisps, right? But it's a like gooey apricot-y dark chocolate salty crisp. Now, if that doesn't sound appetizing, what the hell does? And then the dates just taste like Snickers bar. Like genuinely, it tastes just like a normal Snickers bar. So get onto them because I just batch make like a container full at the start of the week, which again, I didn't do on Sunday. Why did I not do it on Sunday? Oh, because I was so busy and I ran a 32k and I did a yoga session and I had to go and do a food shop. So Sundays were wild and I just didn't find the time, or quite frankly, I didn't want to make the time because I was just sat on my arse. But I did make a pie though. There's been lots of things going on. However, today I wanted to come on and talk about perfectionism, and the thing that kind of triggered this episode for me, because yesterday I had a call with one of the team inside my coaching. I won't mention her name. I'll go into a little bit more detail around some of the bits and bobs, but it really got me thinking about perfectionism, and it's something that I've struggled with massively in the past. I don't anymore. I'm an ex-perfectionism addict, you could say. That just sounds horrible. You get the gist of it. And I wanted to do a bit of an episode on this because I think it's pretty rife in society today. And I think social media has something to say about that because it gives us an arena to be able to almost wear masks and display this world and this persona in which we have to look a certain way, to be a certain way, to give off a certain vibe about ourselves that can make others seem that we are a certain way. It's kind of like a bit of a masquerade ball that's going on with social media. And we've always known this, like it's obviously a highlight reel of everybody's lives, and everybody shows the best parts, and they show the best photos, and when they look the best, and it creates quite a toxic environment and a toxic culture, because the standards in which we uphold and that in which that people are being brought into the world with, if you think about kids in high school with iPhones and algorithms and the standard that's being set for what's being rewarded or what it is that we should be striving for, can set people up to fail, especially when they're in the very kind of early developmental stages of when they're still learning how to be as humans, and they learn a lot from kind of mirrors and the external environment and role models. When you're younger, it's very important because you do mirror back quite a lot, especially like pre-16. Or even especially when you're younger, because obviously you're just mirroring your parents for the first frigging 8 years of your life or whatever it may be. Don't quote me on that, but you get the gist of it. And it can become very toxic because it sets unrealistic high expectations on ourselves. Now, I think this is one of the things, yes, that can cause unrealistic high expectations. It's the pressure that society puts onto us of what we should be, what we should strive for. And that word should is actually quite dangerous. That's one thing when I worked with a therapist, they kept catching me saying should. And she was like, whoa, hang on. By whose standards? Why do you feel like you should do this? Every time you say, oh, I should be doing this, stop yourself and say, I could be doing this, but I don't have to. I get to do it, but it's not that you should or shouldn't. You get the choice. And I think it just instantaneously almost like starts to reprogram the way that we see things in a different way, which is really good, because then we start to almost self-coach, self-regulate ourselves. And that's all about like the neuro-linguistic programming that we use, like programming our brain using language, right? Because it influences our thoughts and the way that we feel. Based off that last episode, we know how much that impacts us, which if anybody did give a listen, by the way, really appreciate it. I know I ramble on in these episodes, but they're, I think, quite valuable anyway for people who maybe just wanted to learn a little bit more about themselves, almost like an introduction to psychology in certain areas. Well, as I said, there's kind of one way that you can create almost like these high standards. It's the pressure that society puts onto you. But then you could maybe go back even further, which is where I believe that for a lot of people, the seeds are planted for perfectionism, and that's around your early childhood. And as we know, our early childhood is going to be really influential when it comes to the development of our brain, the development of the things that we do, things that we don't do, situations that we gravitate towards, situations that we gravitate away from, the person who we become, the personality in which we develop, the tendencies in which we have, the coping mechanisms in which we develop as well. It all is embedded into our subconscious and our brain when we are very young. And perfectionism is actually a coping mechanism for a lot of people. And when I started to learn about this, it made so much sense. And it took me so long to be able to understand and get my head around this, because it's almost as if like you can get taught something and you can listen, but do you really understand it? Like, do you really kind of take it in and swallow it and digest it and then understand it and then apply it and then be like, oh my God, yeah, that's something that really impacts me. And I think it's definitely born from when you were younger. And I think there's going to be different, I'd say, birthplaces for this. And I can obviously talk from personal experience, and also, just looking from like the past 5 years of coaching, of seeing the traits and the characteristics of people and the tendencies and the narrative in which they tell themselves, the way in which they talk to themselves, the way in which maybe sometimes they treat other people, when they have quote unquote perfectionism, you could say, has been really interesting, because it's been allowed me to see it in myself, in others, and how it circulates and how it kind of protrudes and almost like bobs its head up a little bit in certain places. And especially off that call yesterday with one of the team, So this woman was about 45, and she was doing we've been working through weight loss, and on the call yesterday, because we wanted to do a bit of a discovery call, because we haven't been losing weight for a certain amount of time, and it came to my attention, because there's some other things that are going on as well, but it came to my attention that it may be down to the very stressful environment that she may be in, which is causing her body to not function effectively and properly the way that it should, for her body to actually continue to lose weight. Because obviously, at the end of the day, it comes down to energy balance. And for some people, as they have a little bit of a slower metabolism, they burn less calories on the day-to-day basis. Calories need to come lower and lower and lower and lower. But what happens when you eat that low calories every day and you are consistent with your movement and you still don't lose weight? There is almost as if okay, there's something else here at play that we need to observe and understand that may be impacting our body's ability to function effectively and also lose weight at the same time. And this was definitely the case with that. And I think this just goes to show the importance of being able to self-reflect and understand ourselves, because we need to almost piece together a map of ourselves, sometimes of the past, to be able to understand why things are happening the way that they do today. Because it's very easy to just think, things are the way that they are, and that's the way that have always been. This is just who I am, and I just move forward with this, when that's not really the case. And I love this saying, and it comes to mind when I'm talking over this, because similar to what I mentioned in the last episode about my mate I was talking to, Jack, and we were talking about what is best, what's the best kind of thing that we want to strive for, what's optimal, that the situation that we actually want. Because sometimes we chase things that we don't actually want, but we think we just want them because it's going to gain us accolades and benefits and status or whatever that we thought that we needed, but we don't need, because we're okay on our own, for the most part. But just off the back of that conversation, I remember saying to Jack, it was almost it's not about becoming, it's about unbecoming. So the way in which we move forward, it's almost a paradox, right? If you want to move forward the most amount, we almost need to go back. And it's almost what do you mean by that? You could think in terms of a timeline, right? Because, the way that we are, and let's just take perfectionism as an example, because we're talking over that. That is the way that we are, right? And that can take over our life in so many different ways. And that changes the way that we function within the relationships. That changes the way that we function with ourselves, the standard that we hold on ourselves, the way in which we talk to ourselves, so the critic inside our own mind, and the expectations that we carry and hold upon ourselves with our work, sometimes with other people, and it's not always the case, but sometimes with other people. And we can start to see, okay, so to move forward through this, how do we do that? It's a lot of the time by going backwards. It's about looking into the past and say, okay, so when did I start to develop these characteristics? Why did I start to develop these characteristics and these coping mechanisms? And there can be different points in life, of course, and different origins for this. And it may be different for different people, but a lot of the time it's because we hold deep-rooted core beliefs about ourselves in certain areas. We then feel like we have to portray this image which is perfect. We feel like we have to upkeep a very high standard to ensure that we feel good about ourselves, because we don't feel good about ourselves deep down. Or let's say when we were younger, we may have been validated and listened to and loved and cared for when we had a high standard, when we only achieved things. I think with me, with my upbringing, and I'd probably say with a lot of people as well, that when somebody did well, you received love. You received attention, you were listened to, you were given things. Oh, that's amazing, that's great. And as a child, we're very, very receptive to these things. Because we are just in the very early developmental stages with our brain, we start to seek these things because it's pleasure, right? We want to move away from pain and move towards pleasure. So if we live in an environment, for example, where, let's say, there isn't that much positive emotion, or we didn't get that much praise just for being who we are, and that might be because our parents didn't know how to give that. It's not because they're demons and they're horrible. It's just maybe they didn't get that when they were younger either. Or maybe they didn't know how to articulate that or how to be in that way. So it's not pointing the finger and playing the blame game here. We're just trying to understand. That's a really important thing. It's attempting to understand. That's a really, really important thing. And I guess that makes me think about like relationships nowadays, like when you're in a relationship with somebody, which I'm not. And, I can talk over these things, but I'm not the Dalai Lama. And I'm sure obviously there's work to do in many different areas. Same with everybody. But I guess with like relationships, it's almost as if like we are always just seeking to understand. I've definitely been in a position before, even when, with past relationships, it could even be friendships or romantic relationships, with myself and the way that I would be and others and how they would be with me. It's always, everyone's very reactive, aren't they? It's almost as if like if you could raise something or bring something up, it's almost as if like we become defensive. We think people are attacking us, or, we think that we're being judged. And it almost re-triggers all of those wounds that we might have had from when we were younger. And that's why people do get very defensive, because it makes them feel the way, or sometimes confirms the belief that they've always carried about themselves. And they link that to all the pain in which they carry. And that makes them feel like utter and total shit. We've taken a bit of a left turn here, but I think, just being able to understand that, and acknowledge that it's almost like a compassionate inquiry, that every time there's something that we don't understand, that could be to do with our own behavior or somebody else's, or we're triggered or somebody else is triggered. It's a mutual seeking to understand, which creates a completely different playing field, right? Because then all of a sudden everybody's on the same side. We're all just trying to understand. We're all just trying to help each other, which is a really, it's that we then become driven by love instead of fear. Again, that's like an episode I did 4 or 5 weeks ago, which I thought was quite cool and a good take on that. So if you want to listen to more about that, then go and give it a listen. But going back to the parents and not playing the blame game, and seeking to understand and trying to kind of gain a really good perspective. And I think a really good thing that you can do is being able to develop a map of your past, being able to understand why you are the way that you are today. And usually that means going all the way back to childhood and really understanding who you were as a person, understanding your family. So you can draw a family tree, you can draw who's at the top of the tree, who's lower down on the tree, what animals that each family member represent. Are there lines? Are some of the lines thicker in between certain siblings or parents and some of the lines thinner? If they were a certain animal, what characteristics would that animal have? To develop a good idea of what your family was like when you were younger, because once you do that, you can then start to build a bit of an idea and an understanding of, okay, so if this is the way that my family was, this is the way that I got treated, and off the back of that, these are the beliefs that I hold about myself. Now, through that is the beliefs in which I hold about myself then leads me to what are the coping mechanisms that I have, that I've developed and cultivated to soothe my pain and allow me to seek pleasure, which allowed me to survive and allowed me to thrive at that moment in time in my life. Now, once you understand that, and you fast forward to 20 years, and you can sometimes wonder, why do I feel unfulfilled? Why do I feel like my situation is running the show and I'm not? Why do I feel out of control? Why do I feel emotionally up and down? Why do I feel as if I can't control my emotions? Why do I feel as if I have to have high standards with everything all of the time and I have to keep it up, otherwise I feel shit about myself? Why do I feel the need to do all these things? It's because you are still using a coping mechanism. You are still using a response in which you developed and cultivated and learnt when you were younger, which was insanely valuable, by the way. That is not a bad thing. That is an amazing thing. And that just shows how complex we are as beings to be able to develop subconsciously, to seek pleasure, to move away from pain, and to ensure that we can be safe and we can survive. Now, if we fast forward 20, 30 years, those characteristics, traits, coping mechanisms, they become maladaptive. So what was an amazing, great thing turns into a bad thing, right? And I don't want to use, let's say, what was amazing, healthy thing at the time turned into a lot more healthy thing right now, or something that is more of a negative and takes away, or something that is giving so much, then begins something to be that takes away. And I don't want to use good and bad because obviously it just polarizes things and it makes things pretty tricky to kind of think about. So obviously healthy and unhealthy, I'd say, is probably a little bit more. But if we fast forward 20, 30 years, and we have these certain things now which aren't serving us, but because it's all we have ever known, and because it's part of our identity and it's part of our personality, we believe that that is us. And this is where it becomes, sometimes I'd say, a little bit scary, and sometimes I would say really exciting as well. You know, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. Something that may be quite anxiety inducing on the other side of that. It's like wounds, right? The dragon guards the gold, where the greatest treasure is to be found where the danger is most intense. When you have a trigger, when you have a wound, when you have something that's so painful, if you move through that, which is the path of suffering, and we know that suffering is going to lead to enlightenment, you know, it's going to lead to being better versions of ourselves and growing as people. If we take that path and we learn about ourselves, we develop and we grow. But like wounds, you know, we'll brush over them, it'll be painful, and we'll be like, oh my God, you know, fucking, I feel like shit. What they all are essentially are pointers and signs and directions that are saying, hello, you need to look this way because there's something here that is linked to who you used to be in your childhood that is causing you to respond and react in the way in which you do, which is not conducive to the life in which you want and the people in which you want to surround yourself by, and the love that you want to have and the respect that you want to have and the situations and the relationships in which you want to have. And until you go back and fix that, or go back and heal that wound, then you will always have the same response and then always have the same situation. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always have what you've always had. And that's scary because that's entering into a situation that you do not know, right? You're fearing what is in the unknown. And I love this thing from Peter Crone that I heard him talking about the unknown the other day, and some of the times when he's talking, man, oh my God, when he does like reels on stuff that people always say, and he just like spins it off and he just gives a completely different take on it, and it's so like profoundly true. Every second thing that comes out of that man's mouth is literally profoundly true, and I'm like sat there with my chin hitting the desk, fucking wild, like. I don't know. When there's things that are profound, and like when people are talking over things and they talk in a way with such kind of like presence and an energy and understanding, as if like they're so deep rooted within the belief that this is the thing, because they know it to 100% be true, and they stand in authenticity simultaneously. It's like they carry an energy like there is no other, and that is something that I get when I watch him. But he was talking about the unknown, and he was saying that, like, you know, people don't fear the unknown. They fear the suffering in which they would get within the unknown, not because it's almost like the anxiety in which they feel. It's not the unknown itself. It's fearing the suffering that they will get within the unknown, and that's so true, because when we walk down that path. And we don't know what's going to come next, or we willingly walk into suffering, Which, why would we want to do that? Why would we want to walk down the path of suffering? Like, surely, like, why are you just doing that? Is that, surely just like almost self-destruction in some sense. But you could call it death and rebirth, right? Depending on how far you go with things. But that's the path, right? That's the path to self-development. That's the path to improving yourself. Because like I said before, it's not about becoming, it's about unbecoming. And when you go down that path of suffering, you then learn about yourself. You can identify things and triggers and wounds. And through doing that, you can then change the way in which you are. You can heal those wounds. And then you'll find that the coping mechanisms that you're currently carrying will start to dissipate. They will start to reduce in intensity. They will start to reduce in size. They will start to dissolve, essentially. And sometimes when you go down that path and when you start healing, one of the metrics of progress, which is something that I've come back to all of the time, and I started to develop this little mental model that I've almost like tried to make a tracker with, right? Which I'm not allowed to talk about or share. Anyway, and it's almost as if like the methods in which you track your healing process and healing journey with, because it can be very up and down, there can be fluctuations, there's an ebb and flow, it's inconsistent, it's not the same for everybody. And the severity depends on how deep rooted these wounds are, how bad these wounds are, and how much and how long they have been at play for. How old you are, of course, like all these things are at play. So you can't just put a process to something. You can have certain expectations and you can have certain ideas of what things will be like, but you can't say, right, in 10 days this is going to happen, 10 days this is going to happen. But what you can do is you can observe things like your like the intensity of the triggers, the length of the triggers, what is your ability to bring yourself back to an equilibrium, and then also whether you go into certain situations and whether you are even triggered. Because when you go on your healing process and journey and you really understand and you put yourself in similar situations, and in those similar situations you don't react and respond subconsciously as a knee-jerk alike to the way that you used to, that means you are healing. That means the wound in which you used to carry is healing over, and it's then something that isn't causing you to act or respond or react in a certain way. So it's not just about symptom management. And this is the crazy thing about the whole, I would say, the whole medical system nowadays, right? We address things right now. I used to have psoriasis and I used to go down to the doctors, and I've never liked going to the doctors. I just like being a human, something about being like a caveman for me. Like, take me back to the dark ages. Give me a fucking spear, give me a fire, and I will thrive. I will kill the boars. Like, I will do that. That is me. Put me on some earth and I will grow some vegetables and I will look after my family and I will look after everybody in that community with a fucking spear. I will do that shit. Go take your doctors away. No, that's not to say I think doctors are great. I'm not I'm not back chatting, because I think, and obviously it's so important to have these things to make sure that we can manage our health. But I think a lot of the time that we're viewing things through the wrong lens. We're going at things in the wrong way, I think, a lot of the time. We need to go upstream. I know I keep using this saying, but you need to go upstream and start to identify, why are people getting ill in the first place? Why? What's happening? It's like these triggers in which we have, once we understand the way that we are as beings and we're so interconnected, like to what I mentioned last episode, and you start to see, okay, so the way that we're responding right now psychologically to certain situations is linked to past traumas. It's linked to the trauma in which we carry. It's linked to the beliefs in which we hold. Go back and change the belief. Go back and heal the trauma. Then the response doesn't happen. So we can think that in terms of like the healthcare system, right? I could go down to the doctors. I used to have psoriasis. I used to have back pain, fucking endless physiotherapy sessions, endless steroid creams, steroids, whatever, right? you put it on, oh my God, it goes. Oh, it looks great. The cream is great. The cream is the answer to the problem. Guess what? You've got to put the cream on for the rest of your life. So you are now dependent on an external to upkeep your health. That's not the way it should be. By going back and healing my traumas and healing and touch wood, as things continue, I have no chronic back pain, which I used to have since I was 10 years old. I have no psoriasis, and my psoriasis covered my body, and I, really disliked the way that I looked. And I believe that it's because my body was in a very stressed state, because I was living in a state of a trigger, essentially. And I was living in a fight or flight, more stress hormones, more cortisol, more adrenaline, high expectations within myself. I would have a very poor self-talk and kind of like critical view. And that would lead me to be having my body feeling like it's always under attack. It's always being chased by a tiger. Nobody's body can function like that properly. Nobody's body. And that's how disease develops. That's how autoimmune diseases develop. That's how all these things develop within the body. And hip pain and muscle tightness and fascia tightness, it's all interconnected. So if you come back to perfectionism, this is a coping mechanism. And there's a few ways in which we can look at it. But a lot of people, they fill their days so much, they ram their days full because they feel like they have to do that to feel good about themselves. What if you were to stop and slow down? And, I want to mention one thing here. Having high standards is not bad. Having high standards is great, it's amazing. But is it sustainable to upkeep all of the time? No. It's like driving fifth gear everywhere in your car. You're not going to get very far. You will just burn out your clutch, or driving in second gear on the motorway. Like, you're just going to burn stuff out. The RPM will be through the roof, right? And you're going to break down. We need to have this ebb and flow of our processes and how we work with ourselves. And I think when it comes to perfectionism, and then you could even go one step further and say obsessive compulsive disorder. And again, this is speculation. I'm not like saying, oh, it must be because of this. But I think I heard this quote, perfectionism is procrastination masquerading. I can't remember. But basically it was talking about perfectionism and procrastination and it being a mask, basically, and a mask in which we wear that is actually something that's taken us further away from where we should be. And if we have a OCD, going back to that, like the essence of control, that's the word I was looking for. The essence of control, like we try and control things and we squeeze things, right? And we try and control the way that people view us, and then we can try and control our environment. And again, it's not to say that this is inherently bad. There is going to be good parts, or I would say there would be more healthy parts of this as well. It's not labeling things as over here. And the reason why I come back to keep saying that, because today within society, you mention one thing and then people just go and sit on that side and sit on that fence, and then everything that goes on that side of the fence they believe and they understand, and it's just crazy. We need to be able to kind of join together and not be so polarized in the way that we think about things. But OCD is almost like attempts to control. Like if I don't turn that light switch on and off 4 times, I'm not going to be okay today. It's like we outsource the control to the light switch or whatever it may be. And like I used to, if my environment, one thing was off, I could not even start work. With bodybuilding, I got to a point with myself where I would have the same food every day, the same amounts every day. I would do the same routine every day. And this is kind of why I've moved away from the bodybuilding world, because I actually think it's quite unhealthy in terms of the kind of essence of control in which you carry. And if you look at why we are doing that, because we do things for a reason. We don't just choose to do things, of course. We do things because of reasons, right? But if you have that essence of control and you kind of try to squeeze as much out of everything that's going on, then the intensity and the pressure is so high. If one thing, I remember in 1 week, every day I would be perfect. And then one day, let's say I was to have, 25 grams more of pasta, my mind would attach on that pasta and it would absolutely destroy me. I cannot believe you've done that. That is awful. How dare you do that? This is why you're not good enough. That's what it used to be like, right? And that's how much it can control you. And because there was a deep-rooted sense of insufficiency within myself, I would then set these standards up to have to meet them, to give myself a reason to be okay. You know, you don't feel the sense of insufficiency. You're not unworthy. You're worthy. Look at these things in which you're doing every day. Look at the amount of output that you're doing every day. And this is why you could say within like entrepreneurship, and you could even say with like very high performers, and especially those who are overworked within society, which a lot of the time is actually like women in certain areas, because they're so resilient, and women are so resilient, man. Like they have to have babies, you know, like that is not an easy thing to do. That is very, very, very hard, and I commend that. Like, my God, you know. But because they have so much resilience to push through pain, sometimes it almost translates psychologically, and they think that that's the way that they should be, is in nature, when reality, you know, you need to have these healthy boundaries in place. They're exploited in the workplace a lot of the time, like working so much, 50, 60, 70-hour weeks, because they can't say no. And they're trying to make sure that everything's this really high standard. It's not always the link that's made there, by the way. I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, like they're so ruthlessly after the next thing, right? And their standards are so high. And if you saw their diaries, if you saw their Google calendars, right? And this is the crazy thing about business coaching and coaching. It's like more. I remember when I used to be with Mark, and I remember him saying about like coffee. I remember I'll go for a coffee with a friend, you know, and he was like, coffee? Going for a chat with a friend? Do you expect your business to move forward? Going for coffees? Are you joking? I was like, if you can't go for a coffee, at that time I was like, fucking hell, maybe I just, no coffees then, you know, I need to work harder, I need to do more, it needs to be more, and then you just start imploding, and you burn out every week, sometimes burn out every day. Every day is just complete depletion, and when you do that for a long period of time, your body will stop you, and it will bring you into a place where you are depressed. It will slow you down that much to the point where you cannot continue, where you are forced to stop. If you do that, because I've gone through this, it will slow you down to the point, and this is where, again, women with their resilience, because they can keep going, because they're so strong internally, they can keep going. Some men, of course, are the same. They can keep going. But we're not listening to the body and the signals in which we're getting off our body, sometimes because we weren't taught how to do that, to listen to our bodies. Again, goes back to childhood. Just goes to show like the web and the map in which how everything's interconnected. But in terms of like going back to entrepreneurs, it's like that's why the biggest precursor of highly driven and successful people and business owners is trauma. The more trauma you have, the more that you have to push yourself to lengths to prove yourself, to achieve, to be, when everything that you're looking for is in here. Everything is within you. Your value comes from you. And I guess this is where I wanted to end this episode a little bit of like the full circle. And I guess there's a few things that I have done that really help with this, is that little voice, that critic that drives you, or the perfectionism at play where the standards are so high, and you don't let yourself have a day off, or give yourself 10 minutes to have your lunch or whatever, or give yourself it can get pretty bad, give yourself even just a little chocolate bar every day, or whatever it may be, right? If you're not letting yourself do that, you can say to your little child, which is still functioning inside of you, and again, that's quite a difficult thing to accept, that developmentally, we are still at the age of a child in some areas of our brain, which is crazy. When I first heard that, in certain instances with myself, that destroyed me, because I was like, I'm 26, 27, whatever. Like, And I'm a child. I was like, are you joking me? I've got this far through life. But guess what? Everybody's the same. Everybody will have different things in which they have to struggle with. It's just who's going to move through them? Who's going to identify them? Because if you don't, you will put your imprint onto somebody else, and you will find somebody else that is going to fit that mold that you were taught when you were younger. And then the trauma is carried through the generation, through to your kids, through to the kids, through to kids. Unless and you rise above and you move through, then it'll just happen again and again and again. But the things is like, okay, when you have that little voice popping up and that critic and that standard, and you wanting to move through it, the first thing you have to do is listen to it, be aware of it, validate it. If you run away that much because you're so scared of it and you repress it, there was a saying that my yoga teacher taught me: what you repress, something else with an S at the end. What you repress, consists or something. If I remember it, I'll think of it. But you need to validate it and go, thank you for being there. I appreciate you are trying to help me, but I don't need that anymore. You don't need that anymore, because you don't need that anymore. Thank you for trying to push me to these limits, but it's okay. I can take it from here. I can control it. That's the first thing, right? Because you need to treat yourself like a little child. It's called inner child work. Little child, it's okay. Don't worry. Thanks for doing that, but we don't need to do that anymore. It's fine. Like, that's the first thing, right? And then I think second thing is having the self-awareness, the compassion to let yourself off the hook when things don't go wrong. And that's really important. Journaling is really important. Just being able to identify when you are making progress and when you are almost moving forward and having some momentum of things. But also, you're going to feel fear. Doing less than 100%, which is crazy, right? Doing less, giving myself a 20-minute break in the day was so hard. And you might sound like, what are you? Because that is so different to the way that I am now. Like, I love time to think and solitude, time on my own. I love it. It's amazing. I could spend so long just on my own, just being and accepting and understanding that, which again is, I think something that's really important, to be able to accept your position. A lot of people are running away. You need to accept yourself. You know, if you're just running away from yourself and if you have beliefs about yourself deep down, which when I again first learnt about was like, oh my God, like I don't have any beliefs. What are you on about? Like I just didn't even know. My mind patched over it that much and put up that many masks and layers above the onion that I couldn't even see where I was going. And that's the same with everybody, right? If it hurts that much, your body will disassociate you to live somewhere else to cope with that, which is an amazing mechanism, but it becomes maladaptive. It doesn't work. So learning to accept yourself, spending time on yourself, giving yourself time to be with your own thoughts. And I know that can be so challenging for some people. That is so difficult for some people. For me, I remember the first time I had to sit with my own thoughts, because I remember that, like, I'll sit with the emotion, sit with yourself. And I'd be like, what are you on about? What do you mean sit with an emotion? I don't get it. I don't understand that. I just run away. Mentally I'd run away, disassociate, I wouldn't be there. And I think, 95% of people are probably going to do the same. And 90% of those don't even know that they're doing them and aren't even aware. And I think the way in which we make our lives better is through learning about these things and then trying to have the self-awareness to change them. So thanks very much for listening, people. I've actually really enjoyed this episode and I'm enjoying these pods. And this is kind of what I'm so passionate about. I love talking about this. I love this stuff. And I've got some such exciting things lined up in the next few months, which I'm so excited to kind of move through and get my teeth stuck into. And I feel like, I just feel like I've got a message and I feel like I want to give that message to people. And I want to be the person who helps people, not for the same reason in which I used to. I used to help people because I'd outsourced my worth, but because I believe in the betterment of everybody and it makes me feel good. Of course, there's different things. Anyway, that's a different conversation in itself. Anyway, I think I've got a message and I want to be a role model and I want to help people. And I think especially with men in particular, like I said last time, we're so lost, you know. There's nowhere to where are we going? Where's the maps? And I'm trying to give some maps out. So let's get it. Appreciate you listening. If you've enjoyed it, please share to somebody who you feel like would benefit from this episode, or share it on your socials or whatever. And if anybody wants to have a chat, you drop me a message and we'll have a chat. But once again, really appreciate it, and I look forward to jumping on again. And if you're tuning in soon, you're cool. I'll rate you. See you soon.